Hello everyone, this is Shivam. Welcome to my channel. Today I have got another video where we will be looking into how to create a GitLab CI/CD pipeline, and we will be using this pipeline to deploy a web-based Python application to AWS. So without wasting any further time, let's look at the architecture first. I have created a Python and a Flask application, a simple hello world Python application which I'll be deploying onto AWS, but before that I'll be creating a Docker image for my application and I'll be deploying onto AWS using GitLab CI CD pipeline. Once the application is deployed, we'll be accessing it via browser by using AWS public IPv4. So let's look at the code now. So this is the Python application which I have written. As we can see, it's a very simple Python application. So line number 4 is trying to initialize the Python Flask application. Then line number 6 to 9, I'm creating a route for my index.html file. And on line number 10, I'm trying to expose my application to everyone on port 5000. Now let's look at index.html file. As we can see here, this application is just printing hello from Python. And I have created a button which is referencing to this URL. So nothing fancy, very simple Python application. I have also written a test for the application since we are using GitLab CI/CD and we have to create multiple modules for the pipeline. It's better to have a test module for our pipeline. So this test is doing nothing but matching the output whatever has been present in our index.html file. Don't worry if you don't understand this code. The main purpose of this video is to demonstrate how GitLab CI/CD pipeline is working. But just in case if you are looking to understand how this application is working, then I have written a blog on this application, and I'll be mentioning the link of that blog in the description of this video. Do check it out if you want to understand the code line by line. Now let's go and create our gitlab.yaml file, which is a critical component for our pipeline. I will create a file named gitlab-ci.yaml. Remember, the file name is very important. If this file name doesn't match this exact name, then our GitLab pipeline will not work. So this is very important here to note. The file name should be exactly .gitlab-ci.yaml. Now let's write our first module for the pipeline, which is the test module. So I'll be giving the name of the test module as run test, and I'll be using a base Python image of 3.10 Alpine 3.15. After that, there are few things which needs to be executed before our actual script runs. So we will be using before script command. Now, as we can see, I have defined a specific directory structure for my application as all the tests are present inside test folder. So I need to provide certain access to this folder so that GitLab can run this file. So for doing that, I'm using chmod then I'm installing Flask, which is a dependency for our application to run. Now comes the main part where we will be actually executing our test. So I'm just echoing running unit test, and then we will execute our test. So now let me explain this module once again. So the name of the module is run test. I'm using a base Python image of 3.10 Alpine 3.15. Now this is the main script where our test will be running inside run test module. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to run the unit test framework inside this tests folder, which is here. And inside this test folder, I have test app.py. But before this test can run, we need certain dependencies to be installed, and we need to provide certain permission to our test folder. So that's what I'm doing here in this before script command. I'm assigning 777 permission to this test folder, and then I'm installing Flask, which is again a dependency for our application. So now let's push this code to GitLab and see what happens. As we can see, our pipeline has been triggered. Let's check the logs. So it is pulling our base image, which is 3.10. Then it is executing our before script commands. And after that, it is executing our actual script, which is saying echo running test. And then it ran our tests successfully, and it says ran 2 tests. Okay. And then the job has been succeeded. So our first module of our pipeline is now running. The next step here will be to build our Docker image and push it to Docker Hub. So let's see how we can do that. Let's check the Docker file first. So we can see here I'm using the base Python image, which is 3.10, Alpine 3.15. I'm exposing port 80 where our application will be accessible. I'm creating a work directory. I'm copying requirements.txt file. Then I'm installing whatever is inside requirements.txt. And then this is the entry point for my application where it is running my application, which is under source app.py. Nothing fancy, very simple Docker file. So let's go and write our build module for building the Docker image and pushing it to Docker Hub. I will name this module as build. Then I'm gonna use the same image. Then service. Actually, let me copy everything. It will be a lot easy. So now let me explain what is going on here in the build module. So first of all, the name of the module is build. Then I'm using the base Python image, which is 3.10. After that, I'm creating a Docker service, which is called Docker in Docker, which is required to run our pipeline. This will also enable Docker commands to be used within pipeline. After that, I'm creating certs directory for the Docker TLS certificates. And here again, before script, and this is the actual script. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to log into the Docker Hub by using Docker user and Docker password. And once we are logged in successfully, I'm trying to build Docker image by using docker build -t image name :tag. And then I'm trying to push it to my Docker Hub. So let's go and define these variables, which is image name and image tag. So variables, image name, and let me copy my image name. So this is my repository in Docker Hub, and this is the name of the image. Now let's go and define image tag. Let's say I will give 5.0.5. So what I'm doing here, let me explain again this before script and this actual script. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to first log in to Docker Hub using this Docker user and Docker password. You might be noticing that I have not defined this Docker user and Docker password here in this file. But before pushing this code to GitLab, let's go and define these Docker user and Docker password in GitLab. So let's go to settings here. Under settings, we have CI/CD. Inside CI/CD, we can see these variables. So as we can see, I have already created the variable, but for anyone else to create it, you can simply click on add variable, let the type be default, set it to masked visibility type so that your value doesn't appear in logs, and just define your username and whatever value you have. So in my case, my username is Shivam Rana, and click on add variable and your variables will be added. Similarly, add another variable for Docker password, same type as same variable type as default, visibility make it as masked, add key as Docker password, and specify your Docker Hub password. One important thing which I forgot to mention in the previous module was, in order for GitLab to execute your pipeline, we will have to go into settings, CI/CD, and then general pipeline, and we will have to specify that GitLab configuration file, whatever we created. So it should be .gitlab-ci.yaml. Without this file, our pipeline will not run. So I'm sorry, I forgot this to mention earlier, but remember to add this file. Now, once you have added the file, click on Save Changes. And we have also added our variable. So now let's go and push our code to GitLab and see what happens. Our code has been pushed. As we can see here, our pipeline has been triggered. Let's check the logs. So inside our pipelines, we can see that both our module was triggered in parallel, which we do not want, because in any real world scenario, we do not want our build to start without our test module completing successfully. So in order to achieve that, we will be using a concept called stages in GitLab. As we can see, both our pipeline has successfully completed, but let's go and fix this issue so that our build pipeline can only get triggered once our run test module has successfully completed. Like I mentioned before, that we will be using a concept called stages in GitLab. So let's define stages for our pipeline. Stages. So I have defined two stages here. First one is test, and the second one is build push to Docker. So let me add these to my pipeline. Okay guys, so I have defined everything. I just have renamed this stage to upload to Docker to be more clear. And I have defined this stage here. Now let's go and push this code and see what happens. Our code has now been pushed. Let's check GitLab pipelines. And we can see here that our pipelines are now running serially, one after the other. Let's check the log of build module. So as we can see here, it is pulling our base image, which is this one. Then it is trying to log into our Docker Hub. Then it is building our image. It says building. So these are all the steps which it is using to build our image. As we can see here, this is the first line, whatever we defined in our Docker file. This is the second step. Third, trying to install the requirements.txt file. copying src folder, and then it's done. Now it is trying to push our image to my Docker Hub, and it says job successfully completed. So let's go and check my Docker Hub if this image is present or not. So I'm in my Docker Hub, and this is the image name which we used in our application. Let's go and check. And we can see 5.0.5, which was pushed 2 minutes ago. So our image has been successfully pushed to Docker Hub. So we have achieved 2 steps for the GitLab pipeline, which is first running the test module, and second is building and pushing our image to Docker Hub. The third step here will be to deploy this image to AWS EC2 instance. So let's go to our editor and see how we can write the deploy module for the pipeline. So let's define a stage here, which is deploy to AWS. And let me copy my configuration for deploy module. So this is the name of our module, which is deploy. This is the stage on which we will be executing our deployment. And there are a couple of things which I am executing in the before script command, and after that we will be executing our actual script. So in before script command, we are running chmod 400 AWS SSH key. So here I'm providing a specific permission to the AWS SSH key. So this key is nothing but the key which we will be using to launch our AWS EC2 instance. We will look into this when we're gonna launch AWS EC2 instance. Then after that, I am updating all the packages and I'm trying to install sudo. Same in line number 40. I am trying to install snap, and then I'm updating all the packages again. Now inside script folder, we are trying to SSH into our AWS EC2 instance using this key, whatever we have defined here, and this AWS host. So let's go and define this variable AWS host. In fact, let me copy this. AWS host. And we will be assigning this value once we have launched our AWS instance successfully. Now, once we are into our server, we are actually running our script, which are these 2 lines. So first of all, we are trying to log into our Docker Hub using Docker login, Docker user, and Docker password. Remember, we defined these 2 variables in GitLab CI/CD. And once we have successfully logged in, we are running this Docker command in detached mode. So this -t specifies that we are running our container in detached mode, which means that it will be running in background. Our container will be running on port 80, and it will be using our Docker image and Docker tag, whatever we have defined here. So let's go and first launch our AWS EC2 instance. So now I am on my AWS console. Let's go and launch an EC2 instance. I will give it name as my server, and let's use Ubuntu, and we will be using T2 micro, which is eligible for free tier. And we will be using our key, which is key.ssh. This is the same key which we will be referencing in our GitLab.yaml file. Now inside network setting, let's go and edit it and add one security group to it. So let's go and add HTTP. Source can be anywhere. And let's go and launch the instance. Our instance is now running. So let's click on connect, and we can see this is the name of our AWS EC2 instance. And as we can see here, it clearly says run this command if necessary to ensure key is not publicly visible. Remember this command chmod 400 key.pem. This is the same command which I have mentioned in my code here. chmod 400 AWS SSH key. So this is something very important. If this permission is not 400 or anything else, then our deploy module will fail. So now let's go and SSH to our AWS server. Copy this command, then go to PowerShell. Let me go to the directory where my key is present. And if I do ls, we can see here that my key.pem is present here. Now let's SSH to our server. So this is the command. Yes. And we are inside our AWS EC2 instance. So we need to install certain dependencies before we can run our deploy module for the pipeline. So let's go and install certain dependencies, whatever is needed for our application. These are the dependencies which are needed to run our application successfully on AWS. So let's go and install these dependencies one by one. Now this sudo apt install docker.io will install Docker on the server or our application to use Docker command. Let's run this final command. Let's check whether Docker was installed or not. And we can see that our Docker has been successfully installed. So let's head back to AWS. Let's copy our server name and update our GitLab.yaml file. And we will update AWS host here. Now we need to create this SSH key so that we can deploy our Docker image to AWS. So in order to get this SSH key, let me open another PowerShell. Let me go to the directory where my key.pem file is present. Remember, this is the same key whatever we used to launch our instance. If I do ls, we can see this key.pem. Now if you do cat key.pem, it will output the contents of this file. Copy the contents of this private key and let's head to GitLab. Inside GitLab, let's go to CI/CD. Again, let's go to variables and click on add. And remember to select type as file and leave all other settings as default. Give the name as AWS SSH key and paste the content of the private key here and click on add variable. Now once you have done this, let's go and push our code to GitLab and see whether we are able to deploy our Docker image to AWS EC2 instance or not. Our code has been pushed and we can see here our pipeline has been triggered, and our deploy pipeline will only be triggered once our build pipeline has completed successfully. So let's wait for the pipeline to complete. Let's look at the logs of the deploy pipeline. And we can see it says our job has been successfully completed. Let's look at the logs first. So it is running our before script command, and after that it is running our actual script. So one important thing to note here, that this strict host key checking equal to no. Remember, when we SSH to our AWS instance, we have to confirm whether we would like to SSH to our system, and we typed yes. So in order to remove that option, we use this option which is called strict host key checking equal to no. So if we specify this option, then we don't have to specifically type yes whether we want to log into our server or not. And it is trying to pull image from our Docker hub, and it says pull complete, and then it downloaded the newer image which was hello py 5.0.5. See this line 128, it says downloaded newer image for mast / hello py : 5.0.5. So why this mast is coming here? So you remember when we created our Docker username, we selected that option as masked so that our values could not be visible in logs. So that's the thing which is coming here, masked, and this is the name of the image. Now let's check if our image was deployed on AWS EC2 instance or not. So this is my AWS EC2 instance. Let's run docker ps command, and we can see that the container is running, and this is the image whatever we have deployed, and it was deployed 2 minutes ago, and it is now accessible on port 80. So now let's try to access our website from browser for our EC2 instance, and let me grab this IP. So this is the public IP on which our website should be accessible. Let me copy this. Let's go to Edge, and let me paste it over here. And we can see our website is accessible. Now, one important thing which I would like to mention here is that sometimes in certain browser, when you try to run this public IP, it will by default use HTTPS, and it will give an error that your connection is not secure. So if you are getting that error message, try removing S from HTTPS and it should work. So you should do something like this: HTTP and then your public IP, and your website will be accessible. Suppose if I do HTTPS, then it will give an error and your website won't be accessible. Like you see, it is trying to load the website and it will ultimately fail. I know it has happened with me. In fact, let me try to open this in another tab. Oopsie, your website could not be reached. Now, if I try to remove S from HTTPS, then it should work. This is because we configured that additional security group while launching our AWS instance, which says the protocol should be HTTP and source is anywhere. So that's the reason why it is working. So that was it, guys. I hope this video was helpful and you will be able to grab some information out of it. I will be listing my GitHub repository in the description of this video. Do check it out. And if you want line by line explanation of the code, whatever I have written, including the Python code or the GitLab.yaml file or any other code from this application, feel free to check my blog, which I'll be mentioning in the description of this video. There I have explained in detail how this application is working. That's it for this video, and I will see you in next one. Till then, keep learning.